thought the uniform was just for show. A man in a funny hat, standing still for tourists. Just another piece of scenery to mock and disrespect. But what happened when this wealthy American CEO spat directly in a royal guard's face? It wasn't anger. It wasn't revenge. What the god did next left the entire crowd breathless and taught the world a lesson in true strength, dignity, and restraint. If you believe honor still matters in today's world, like this video right now. Just read, I have a comment. Have you ever seen someone stand tall in silence when they had every right to explode? And subscribe to Gold Royals because we bring you powerful stories like this every single day. Right here, stick with us until the very end. Because when this guard finally speaks, his words don't just silence the man who spat on him, they'll stick with you long after the video ends. He's not just a soldier. He's not just a tourist attraction. He's a man who stood still for 8 hours and moved only once to defend something much bigger than himself. Let's go back to that fateful summer afternoon and witness the moment dignity faced down arrogance. It was just after 2:00 p.m. on a blazing summer afternoon in London. The golden rays of sunlight bounced off the iron gates of Buckingham Palace, dancing across the cobblestone walkways where hundreds of tourists had gathered. Phones raised, hearts full of curiosity. Parents lifted children onto their shoulders. Grandparents pointed to the palace windows, telling stories from another time. It was a moment filled with joy, history, and anticipation. The changing of the guard ceremony was moments away, a tradition that dates back centuries, one steeped in honor, discipline, and unbreakable routine. To many in the crowd, it was just part of the London experience. But for one man standing at attention near the gates, it was something far deeper. To the untrained eye, Jonathan Reed was just another figure in red, unmoving, unreadable, unshakable. But behind that 1,000-yard stare stood a man who had seen war, lived through loss, and learned to master every emotion that threatened to break through the surface. At just 32, Reed had served 2 full tours in Syria with the British Armed Forces. His path to Buckingham Palace hadn't begun with polished boots and royal ceremonies. It had started in dust-choked streets, under the hiss of incoming mortars, where every decision could mean life or death. He still remembered the sound of his comrade's voice, the last call for help over a radio, buried beneath the roar of gunfire. He remembered the long nights in sand-filled outposts, trying to stay awake while his brothers slept just to keep watch. And he remembered the quiet after a mission, when you sit alone, exhausted but thankful, wondering if you'll ever feel normal again. So when people whispered, "They just stand there, it's not real work," he said nothing. He didn't need to. His silence wasn't weakness, it was willpower honed through fire. What most people didn't understand was that it takes more strength to stay still under provocation than it does to strike back. After returning from deployment, Reed didn't talk much about what he'd seen. He moved into a modest flat outside London, kept his medals in a small wooden box, and woke each morning before the sun to press his uniform with military precision. Not because anyone told him to, but because it mattered. Every crease in that uniform, every inch of polished leather. It was a promise to the men he served with, to the people who never came home, to the crown, yes, but more importantly to the principles that still meant something to him: discipline, dignity, and duty. That's why he never broke formation. Not for heat, not for exhaustion, not even for mockery. He once told a younger guard, we put this uniform on, we stop being individuals, we become symbols, living reminders that something in this world still deserves to be respected. And that afternoon, standing before Buckingham Palace, Jonathan Reed was the embodiment of that belief. The summer sun beat down, Sweat pooled beneath his collar. Children waved. Tourists snapped photos. A few tried to make him laugh. Some even mocked him. He didn't move. He didn't blink. But he noticed everything. The old man tipping his cap in quiet reverence. The veteran in a faded U.S. Navy cap nodding from across the barricade. The little girl in a wheelchair waving with both hands. Reed didn't acknowledge them, but he felt them. Every one. He saw him. The man walking toward the post. American, well-dressed, loud, entitled. He couldn't have known it then, but this man, Charles Dunning, was about to test everything Reed had ever stood for. Not with a weapon, not with violence, but with something far more personal, disrespect. And in the next few minutes, Jonathan Reed's silence would be pushed further than it ever had been before. While Gwar Jonathan Reed stood as a symbol of sacrifice and silent strength, Charles Dunning was the embodiment of something else entirely, entitlement dressed in wealth. Born into a legacy of money, Dunning was a tech CEO from New York who had never heard the word no without the phrase, "but let me fix that for you," quickly following. At 45 years old, he ran one of the most profitable digital marketing firms on the East Coast, had a summer estate in the Hamptons and a garage full of luxury vehicles he rarely drove himself. And yet, on this summer afternoon in London, he wanted more than his money could buy. He wanted control. Earlier that day, Dunning had enjoyed a champagne breakfast at the Ritz, where the maitre d' greeted him by name. His platinum Amex had opened doors at Harrods for private shopping. And now, with 3 business associates in tow and a few too many drinks in his system, he found himself standing outside Buckingham Palace. "Watch this," he said, slurring slightly. "Bet you $50 I can make this guy crack." His friends chuckled, phones already recording. But to them, this wasn't history, it was entertainment. They didn't see a veteran. They didn't see a man holding back the weight of memory. They saw a prop in a red coat. What Dunning didn't understand, and maybe never had, is that true strength doesn't respond to mockery. It stands quietly above it. He strutted toward Jonathan Reed with the practiced arrogance of a man who was always the most important person in the room. His tone wasn't curious, it was condescending. His smile didn't invite, it challenged. "Hey buddy," he called out, loudly enough for nearby tourists to hear. "You ever blink, or is that part of the robot programming?" Reed didn't move. Dunning stepped closer, now just feet away from the guard's post, his cologne thick and overbearing, mixed with the scent of midday heat and alcohol. He waved a hand in front of Reed's face. No reaction. He laughed louder. "What's the matter? You only move when the Queen says so?" His voice carried, filled with that smug confidence only money and inexperience with consequence can bring. Most people around the scene began to shift uneasily. An elderly British woman clutched her purse tighter, muttering under her breath, "Disgraceful." Her father pulled his son in closer, shielding him from the growing tension. But Dunning, he was just getting started. He turned toward his friend and announced, "This is going viral for sure." He posed beside Reed, throwing exaggerated gang signs and puffing out his chest. Still no response. That silence? It wasn't weakness. It was calculated restraint. An iron wall built from years of experience, from training, from pain. Reed noticed everything. He saw Dunning stagger, the redness in his face, the tremble in his hand. He could tell this man wasn't just drunk. He was dangerous in the most unpredictable way. Someone trying to prove something to himself. And then it happened. "You think you're better than me?" And with that, he spat. A thick wad of saliva struck Reed just below the right eye. The sound, the sudden snap of disbelief, echoed through the crowd. For a brief moment, it was as if the whole of London fell silent. No birds chirped. No phones clicked. Even the clouds seemed to pause above. Everyone waited. They expected a reaction. They expected the man in the red uniform to break, to yell, to strike, to throw down his rifle and show he was human. But what they got was something entirely different. Because Jonathan Reed was human, he was just built differently. And now, for the first time in hours, he would move. Not out of rage, not out of impulse, but with purpose, with discipline, with the full weight of history, sacrifice, and silent strength behind every inch of that motion. And what he said next would not just silence Charles Dunning, it would humble an entire crowd. The moment his spit landed on Reed's cheek, the world seemed to stop. For a split second, the sun, the heat, the noise of the crowd, it all froze in midair. But Dunning, he mistook the silence for submission. He smirked. Reed didn't flinch. He didn't blink, didn't wipe it away. The saliva glistened on his face like an unwanted medal, but Reed wore it like stone. To the crowd, it was unthinkable. To Dunning, it was a sign he could go further. "Come on," he slurred, taking another step forward, now so close he could see the stitching in Reed's collar. "Do you even feel anything? Or are you just trained to shut it all off like a glorified statue?" He leaned in, his words sharper now, flavored with frustration and scotch. "I bet even your fancy hat's hollow." The iconic black bearskin cap, tall, historic, symbolic, stood inches from Dunning's fingertips. One twitch and he would have crossed the final line. A mother nearby clutched her daughter's hand tighter. A young tourist from Kansas whispered, "Is he allowed to do that?" Even the guards at the far end of the courtyard began to shift. Not in fear, in readiness. What Dunning didn't understand, what he couldn't understand, is that Jonathan Reed wasn't just enduring the moment. He was calculating it. Any breath, every shuffle in the crowd, every drunken sway in Dunning's step. 8 years in the military had taught him how to read a battlefield. And this was one. Not of bombs and bullets, but of pride, patience, and principle. "Ladies and gentlemen," he shouted, "let's find out if these red-coated tin men actually bleed." Some in the crowd laughed nervously. Others turned away, uncomfortable. The older couple near the fountain shook their heads in shame. A street vendor pushed his cart slowly out of frame, sensing where this was going. Even Dunning's own friends, who had once cheered him on, were starting to fidget. One of them whispered, "Kev, man, this is getting out of hand." But it was too late. Dunning was in too deep. His ego was louder than reason. "What exactly do you protect anyway?" he scoffed, now circling Reed like a predator that had forgotten the rules of nature. "You stand there in the sun in some costume and pretend it means something?" His voice cracked slightly, more from desperation than dominance. But the performance continued. "Daddy," she asked softly, "why is that man being so mean?" The father didn't answer right away. His jaw clenched. His hand rested protectively on his daughter's shoulder. "Finally," he whispered, "because some people don't know what respect looks like until it's too late." And respect was exactly what Dunning was about to come face to face with. Because Jonathan Reed had heard enough. He didn't move, yet, but in his mind something was shifting. This was no longer about protocol or composure. It was about honor. You see, Reed had been insulted before. He'd been spit at, cursed at, threatened, and even tested by protesters. But never like this. Never by someone so smug, so willing to desecrate what others had died to protect, so blind to the meaning of that red coat and what it represents. But Reed didn't act out of pride. He stood still because thousands who came before him had done the same. Because he knew sometimes the loudest answer is the one delivered in silence. What happened next wasn't explosive, wasn't loud, yet it was unforgettable. It started with a single command. From behind Reed, the guard captain's voice echoed across the yard. "Guard, stand down." And with that, for the first time all day, Jonathan Reed moved, but not with fists, not with rage, with purpose, with history, with the calm weight of duty, justice, and generations of unshakable resolve behind every inch of that motion. He didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He didn't reach for a weapon. Because men like Jonathan Reed don't answer insult with instinct. They answer it with integrity. For over 8 hours, he had stood motionless under the burning London sun, through heat, fatigue, and humiliation. But now, with his honor challenged, his uniform disrespected, and tradition spat upon, he finally had permission. From behind, the firm voice of Captain Marcus Ellsworth rang out. "Guard, stand down." A collective breath rippled through the crowd. And with military precision, Reed moved. Slow, steady, deliberate. He pivoted 45 degrees, the click of his polished heel cutting through the air like a crack of thunder. He came to attention, shoulders square, chin lifted, the sunlight gleaming off the ridge of his bearskin hat. Then, with textbook grace, he raised his right hand and saluted his commanding officer. "Sir, permission to address the situation?" Ellsworth gave a single nod. What came next would be remembered by every soul in that courtyard. Not as an outburst, but as a moment of living history. 8 years ago, I stood in a desert half a world away, holding the hand of a wounded comrade, calling in air support while bullets flew overhead. His voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. It carried like a hymn through sacred halls. I didn't wear red then. I wore camouflage, sand in my boots, blood on my sleeves. I watched friends fall in places most people can't pronounce, because we believed something was worth protecting. The crowd was utterly still. No one spoke. No one moved. Even Dunning, his sunglasses slipping from his collar, his smirk long gone, stood rooted in place, suddenly aware of the weight of what he'd done. Reed. And when I came home, I took another oath, to serve again. Not with bullets this time, but with presence, with silence, with a symbol. He turned to face Dunning directly, his eyes unblinking, his voice unwavering. "You see a costume, I see a gravestone. You see a hat, I see a flag folded on a mother's lap." A soft gasp escaped a woman in the crowd. A man removed his baseball cap. One elderly veteran in the front wiped a tear from beneath his sunglasses. "Reed, I didn't flinch when you mocked me. I didn't move when you spat on me. Because some things don't deserve a reaction, they deserve a lesson." He stepped forward. Just one step. It's not as a threat, but as a man reclaiming sacred ground. "You wanted to make a scene, you wanted a video, congratulations." He looked out into the crowd now. His voice softened, but somehow felt even stronger. "But this is not about you, it's not even about me." He gestured to the palace behind him. "It's about everything this place stands for. Discipline, restraint, sacrifice." He paused, and then added, more personal now, "It's about the friends I lost who will never stand guard again. It's about the children in this crowd who are watching to see how a man should act when tested. And it's about the elders here, who remember a time when dignity meant something." Reed turned back to Dunning, his voice low and direct. "You don't owe me an apology, sir, but I hope someday you understand what this uniform means. Because if you do, maybe you'll finally understand what strength really looks like." He stepped back into position, straightened his spine, and without another word, returned to stillness. A hush fell across the courtyard, not out of shock anymore, but out of respect. There were no raised voices, no retaliation, and the lesson delivered in discipline. And in that moment, Jonathan Reed reminded everyone watching, from children to veterans to strangers with cameras, that true strength doesn't shout, it stands. He returned to silence. No anger, no gloating, no satisfaction on his face, just discipline restored. But the man who had just delivered one of the most powerful public moments in recent memory had changed the entire atmosphere around him, and the crowd felt it. There was no cheering, no applause. What followed instead was something far more profound, a wave of stillness, as if the entire courtyard had been humbled. Among the bystanders was Harold Whitmore, 82 years old, who had served in the Royal Air Force during the Cold War. As Reed's words echoed in his mind, he whispered, almost to himself, "That's a soldier." The woman beside him, wiping a tear with the corner of a handkerchief, nodded slowly. "Darby," she whispered, "is that man a hero?" He didn't speak right away. He looked at the guard, at his stillness, his strength, his dignity. Then he leaned in close and said, "Anan is the kind of man I hope you grow up to respect." All around the courtyard, conversations began, but they weren't about the palace or the monarchy or the pomp and pageantry. They were about character, about what it means to stand for something, about how a man wearing red who didn't move when pushed somehow moved them more than any speech or sermon ever could. Even the most cynical among them, those who first arrived looking for spectacle, now stood in quiet awe. The transformation was palpable. They hadn't just witnessed a confrontation, they had witnessed conviction. And somewhere in the background, the man responsible stood silently between two police officers, his hands cuffed, his sunglasses now dangling from one wrist, forgotten. His friends who once laughed with him avoided his eyes, their phones lowered, their shoulders slumped. The bravado was gone. What replaced it was a cold, sobering clarity. One officer leaned in, his voice low but firm. "Assaulting a Queen's Guard isn't just disrespectful, it's criminal. But I'd be more concerned with what the internet's going to do to you." Because by now, the moment had already gone viral. Footage from 6 different angles was being uploaded within minutes. And unlike so many other clips that showed guards being provoked or mocked, this one struck a chord, not because of the spit, but because of the response. This is what real strength looks like. It should be in history books. This needs to be shown in classrooms. We need more men like this in today's world. Within the hour, hashtags like Respect the Guard and Stand Like Reed were trending across platforms. American veterans, British school teachers, Canadian police chiefs, even young college students were sharing the clip. But beyond the views and the likes, something more meaningful was happening. At home dinner tables, in quiet living rooms, in churches, classrooms, and veterans' halls. People were talking again about values they feared were being forgotten. Words like honor, restraint, discipline, respect. They were spoken not as memories, but as aspirations. The impact wasn't limited to headlines or comment sections. That moment, Reed's moment, became a lesson, not just for Dunning, but for everyone who had ever doubted the power of composure, the meaning of tradition, or the strength found in silence. And perhaps the most telling reaction came later that night. That was something else today, John. Reed didn't smile. He just nodded, folded his gloves with care, and whispered, "Just doing the job." But the world knew it was more than that, because sometimes one man standing still can move an entire generation. In a world that moves faster every day, where shouting often drowns out substance, and where respect can feel like a relic of the past, one man reminded us all that silence, when grounded in principle, can echo louder than any voice. Jonathan Reed didn't defend himself with his fists. He didn't stoop to insults. Instead, he held the line, not just for tradition, not just for his uniform, but for something much bigger. He showed us that true strength doesn't need to roar. It just needs to stand firm, with grace, with purpose, and with unwavering dignity. And maybe that's the lesson we all needed to hear again. Whether you're a veteran, a parent, a grandparent, or someone who just believes in decency, this story wasn't just about a royal guard. It was about us, about the values we choose to live by, about how we treat others when we think no one's watching, and about how one man in red can show the world what it truly means to be strong, respectful, and human. So tell us, on a scale from 1 to 10, how powerful was this moment to you? Drop your rating in the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. If you believe dignity still matters in today's world, give this video a like. Share your reflections. Has someone in your life ever taught you a lesson like this? And don't forget to subscribe to Guad Royals for more true stories of honor, discipline, and everyday strength. Because every day we share moments that remind us what's worth standing for.